Hello, and welcome to the Riverfolk Company. We're glad that you, or your superiors, have taken your first steps on a journey that will last the rest of your life. As a new member of our Funds division, you'll be putting the fun in fungible assets.
Hey, didn't see you there. My name's Lou, Regional Manager with the Riverfolk Company, and here in our Funds division, you'll be on the ground floor of company operations performing work that is dynamic and challenging, with plenty of opportunities for advancement. Our team members are the most dedicated and hardworking of any industry. I'm sure you'll fit right in. In fact, let's introduce some of them now.
Good evening, dear sir. Welcome to Chateau de Crow, the distinguished faction for players of refinement and taste. My name is Nevakanezah, and I'll be your waiter tonight. Please allow me to introduce our main course. The Corvid Conspiracy is, without a doubt, the most challenging faction in all of Root. Yes, it's because they're bad. But it's also because they're a very complex, cerebral faction with immense tactical depth you'll need to master in order to overcome their many flaws. Mastering this faction means optimizing your very limited resources to protect a very fragile scoring engine. It means perfecting your social game plan in order to keep opponents fixated on the wrong threat. And for many experienced players who've never given the crows much thought, it can mean completely relearning how you look at the game of Root. You know, it's kind of funny. In my experience, one of the best ways to teach the Corvid Conspiracy is also the most thematic. You help someone cheat in one of their games. It's the best way to introduce them to the kind of mindset they should have on the board state and their opponents, while also explaining the sorts of decisions they'll need to make in order to have a chance of winning. Now, I obviously can't help you all cheat in your Corvid games. Not for free, anyway. Instead, I'm planning to release a companion video to this guide where I go through a real Crows game and outline what that might look like. It'll probably be the next video I work on after this one. Let's begin with the stats. We're a highly flexible faction with a respectable 15 warriors. We have the fastest early game recruiting of any faction, can be everywhere on the map. We don't need to worry about rule, we have decent crafting capability. Crafting a birdsong is hilarious, fighting us can be very expensive, and we are a major threat to other insurgents. Sadly, we have a limited action economy. We need a lot of movement to consolidate our warriors cost us cards, our scoring engine costs us warriors, our scoring engine is incredibly transparent, stopping that scoring engine is so easy that it sometimes happens accidentally, our scoring engine is also easy victory points for our opponents, and we're the only faction that cannot gain victory points from their faction board during our turn at all, period. In fact, our resources are so limited that in a typical 7-turn game, we can pretty much spreadsheet that crap. We have 31 possible recruits, 32 in ad set, who will need to be consolidated in order to plot. We have 21 actions, we have 8 plots, 10 cards, 7 cards that we'll need to be spending to recruit every turn, 7 warriors will be spending if we only plot once per turn, 7 actions we'll be spending to place those plots, 7 warriors committed to defending those plots so we can flip them later, and 28 victory points that those 7 plots would earn us, leaving us 2 victory points we have to find somewhere else. Thus, if our opponents somehow allowed us to play spherical crows in a frictionless vacuum, we would need to win the game with only 24 recruits, 3 cards, and 14 actions. Couldn't be simpler. Overall, this means that the crows have to play one of the tightest optimization games in all of Root. In spite of this, even though it takes practically all game to set up our scoring engine, one exposure or a single battle from one enemy warrior can set you back an entire turn's worth of actions and recruiting. This is why counterplay to the crows often follows an inverse Dunning-Kruger curve of effort expended. If we want to win games as the crows, then we have 3 jobs. First, flip as many plots as we can. Second, get as much value out of every card and action as we can. And third, take as little damage from opponents as physically possible. If we want to achieve those jobs, our game plan is as follows. We're going to spam plots we know will survive a turn. We're going to recruit every single turn. We're going to kneecap and manipulate our friends to keep them desperate and busy. We're going to keep a low profile. We're going to flip our way to 26, not 22, but more on this later. And then finally we're going to eke out a win on cardboard and crafting. I'd like to tell you a brief story, and perhaps it's already familiar to you. You're fairly new to Crows. Your first couple turns are going well. You've put some plots down on your opponent's most valuable clearings, and you gleefully start counting the points you'll score once all that cardboard goes up in flames. Then, almost as an afterthought, your opponent battles your plot away, or guesses it with exposure. It took you almost an entire turn to put it there, and destroying it cost them nothing. This situation should come as no surprise, however. By plotting so aggressively, you've forced your opponent into destroying your plot. If we want to win, we need our plots to survive, first and foremost. This is easier said than done. And don't think I don't see you over there, excitedly fidgeting in your chairs, just waiting to remind me about embedded agents. Allow me to crush your profligate hopes in advance. Because the extra hit occurs after the dice have already been rolled, embedded agents arrives too late to ever actually matter. It doesn't make your plots any harder to destroy, it doesn't increase your opponent's losses if they only send the bare minimum number of warriors, and it's so weak a deterrent that most players refer to it as, "Oh yeah, I forgot about embedded agents." If we're going to protect our plots, we can't just stack up warriors either. More defenders means more costly move actions for us, and each warrior we lose has a direct impact on our scoring engine. Every defender we add to a face-down plot also only increases the odds that opponents will use exposure instead and bypass those defenders entirely. In fact, let's take a quick minute to give a warm welcome to Exposure, the rule that isn't. The Oxford Dictionary defines a rule as an explicit or understood regulation or principle governing conduct within a particular activity or sphere. A form of limitation, if you will. Well, exposure has such a paucity of limitations it can hardly be considered a rule at all. It is the single most permissive rule in Root, and very frustrating. It is available virtually any time during your turn. It is available any number of times per turn. It costs literally nothing unless you're wrong. You can combine exposure and battle however you like, to cover for your personal failures as a player. It doesn't even prevent you from exposing with cards you drew that turn. Dedicated opponents or a coordinated table will just throw useless cards at you to guarantee plot removal. You have no good use for the cards you'll receive because opponents will never gamble something you want, and even though the risk-reward ratio of exposure is terrible for us as Crow players, I do have to give it credit for enabling fun plot mind games. To return to the topic of flipping plots, however, by trying to defend our plots with a lot of warriors, we're just playing everyone else's game, and they play it much better than we do. Instead, we're going to need an approach to defending that is entirely our own. It is my great pleasure to introduce the Corvid School of being a huge pain in the ass. If we don't want our plots destroyed, then destroying our plots should be a huge pain in the ass. We keep our plots safe by making the cost-benefit ratio of destroying them as god-awful as possible. Extra actions to move, extra cards, extra warriors. We make ourselves look like a pain in the ass to deal with, and our opponents will gladly find better things to do on their turn than stop us. Playing the defender in Root generally really sucks, thus the best defense is often, quite literally, a good offense. There's a 12% chance you'll get 3-0'd as a defender, and if you play Crows long enough, you'll start to believe that it's much higher. As an attacker, however, there's a nearly 45% chance you'll suffer no losses at all. With embedded agents, your average hits as a defender still don't compare to the benefits of attacking first, and for every enemy warrior you take them below 3, the survival rate of your plots increases by roughly 15%. Next, our ability to be everywhere on the board is an advantage no other faction has, except Lizards, and we can use that to plot in distant places that our opponents don't want to go, making them waste actions moving if they want to interact with us. Spreading out our plots can force opponents to divide their attention if they need to take us down. Grouping our plots up can put the onus of stopping us entirely on one player alone, however. That player is someone that you can then relentlessly bully. In the early game, our plots can help funnel our opponents into each other's space by making some clearings less appealing than others. If the board is already filling up, plotting in the enemy backline can mean that stopping you will require diverting important frontline troops. If we do want to plot on someone's favorite clearing, make sure to pick the person who can't afford to throw cards away on bad guesses. Lizards, moles, and sometimes cats can be protective of their hands, and the Eerie or Woodland Alliance often play with barely any hand at all. Read the table and figure out who would rather just get blown up than play the plot tax. Crafted improvements like partisans and armorers can also make our plots look even less appealing, even if we don't really intend to use them. It is often better to keep plots face down until later in the game. This gives opponents more targets that they have to worry about and keeps the odds of exposure at 25%. I personally prefer to only flip 3 plots early on. An extortion for the cards, a snare that I can trick later, and a raid that I know will be left alone even when it's undefended. This trio makes for a good early game foundation that your later plots can build upon. This is a careful balancing act though. If you suspect an attack is coming, it's better to secure the points for your face-down plots while you still have the chance. Having the Woodland Alliance in your games is enormously beneficial to our survival as well. Not only does our recruiting avoid outrage, but sympathy tokens make our plots even less appealing to reach and destroy. Plus, the Woodland Alliance is one of the factions least capable of stopping us, while their tokens represent a consistent source of precious points for us. You have to make sure, however, that they don't get the chance to outrace you. Lastly, we're going to need at least 1 warrior in order to flip our plot. So, how many defenders do we actually want? The correct and general answer is as few as it takes for people to leave you the fuck alone. In the first couple of turns especially, this number can be as low as 0. No one wants to spend their precious setup turns walking over to destroy a plot, and I personally have played many games where I started with 2 completely unguarded plots and later won the game. For most situations, however, 2 defenders is kind of the magic number. 2 warriors means the battling your plot becomes a 50-50 as to whether it'll require a second battle and trigger embedded agents twice. If we get attacked, losing 3 warriors to a dedicated opponent is a lot more expensive than losing just 2. By having 2 warriors, it means that opponents can't prevent a flip by sending 1 sacrificial warrior to take the trade. 2 defenders is the intersection between minimal cost and effective returns. 1 defender makes your plot an easy target. 3 defenders is more expensive for nearly the same value of 2. Having 4 or more defenders will just convince your opponents to use exposure instead. The art of placing our plots demands dedication and mastery of both mind and body. As we perfect these techniques, we Crow players transcend through many layers of understanding until we reach our final, perfect form. Most of the time, we're plotting for points. We're going to place whichever plot seems least obvious, in whichever location seems least important, solely because we only care about having it survive for 1 turn. Bombs can be fairly handy for farming points. Because they're removed after they flip, you can repeatedly place bombs in a distant clearing we control to farm victory points while limiting your presence in enemy clearings. This does, however, come with the drawback that you'll have fewer plots to flip overall, though. Some players like to select their plots randomly, in an effort to minimize the effectiveness of exposure. While this can be a fun approach, it has a few key flaws. First and foremost is that you are sacrificing agency in plot selection for exposure resistance when you don't have to sacrifice it at all. It often results in doubles of the same plot being placed and flipped at once, and it tends to place more bombs, resulting in less overall point gain. If you're plotting for points alone, it can be a very passive approach, however, and sometimes we do need to squeeze more value from our plots, or respond to opponent behaviors. An opponent who overuses exposure can be turned to our advantage, as these players frequently overlook battles as an option entirely. Exploit this behavior by dropping under-defended plots into their space that they will struggle to guess, and these players will happily give you their entire hand so you can keep exerting every turn. Some opponents, and some factions, will gladly target you with every spare battle they have. This is one of the more dangerous behaviors we can encounter, as the losses from these battles add up very quickly. Avoiding these opponents is preferable because it's cheaper, but it isn't always sustainable. We can use our plots to bait these opponents into overextending, taxing both their actions, hand, and warriors until they're far behind the table and need to change tact. If you can afford it, however, it's best to immediately go for the jugular when facing this kind of opponent, as severely crippling them early on will give you the time you need to actually play the game. One of the most effective counterplay strategies opponents will use against us is guessing raid with exposure and battling us if our opponent was wrong. This disarms the one form of counterplay that crows were supposed to have against aggressive players, and the only cost to them is a card that probably wasn't valuable anyways. Players who pursue this approach already intend to battle us, and should be treated like any other aggressive player. Give them a reason to feel afraid, and they'll give us a lot more space. Snares are unique among our plots for passively harming our opponents as long as they're face up. This makes them the best choice for when we want to successfully impede an opponent with one of our plots, because we don't have to flip the snare in the location we need to use it. Put a hard-to-guess plot on your opponent's clearing, then, once it's face up, trick it with the snare to get all of the benefits with far less risk. Lastly, sometimes the best approach to get value from our plots is, as they say in the vernacular, just YOLO that fucker. Every now and again, just cram that bomb straight up someone's asshole and see if they mind game themselves into thinking it's a fake out or overlook its existence entirely. This is even more effective if you've already downloaded their habits and have conditioned them to think that you're just baiting exposure guesses. Ultimately, choosing plots comes down to a balance between scoring points, getting value from plot effects, and avoiding exposure. And I couldn't possibly possess the detailed psychological profile on every single root player that you would need to always win the mind game war. Yet. If you find yourself locked into mental warfare like some kind of trash-eating light Yagami, my personal advice is this. Try not to overthink it. Feel free to turn your brain off for a moment to ask yourself, which of these plots would piss him off the most right now? And you'll no doubt find both the best plot to select, but also the weakness you can exploit in your opponent's behavior. Now that we've covered the considerations behind our plots, it's time we learn how to, actually play the game. During setup, I'm not gonna lie, just put the extortion down. We need the cards, and the board literally does not get any safer than this. Every turn we go without an extortion, however, only makes your desperation to flip one more obvious, making it easier for opponents to prevent. Hell, if you find yourself playing against crows, just let them flip the damn extortion. It ends up being like rushing the keep with the marquise. All you're accomplishing is making an enemy for life. Digital Root is the only place where people try to guess the turn 1 extortion, and I'll be honest, if it ever happens to me, I would respond by board wiping you on turn 2, and you'll only have yourself to blame. As for the rest of our setup, put yourself as far away from other factions as you can get, and place your warriors anywhere that you can make immediate use of them on your first turn. Beyond that, you're just adapting to your personal read on the table. Crafting. The crows are good at crafting in the same way that road crews in your city are good at construction. They sure can do a lot of it, but never when you actually want it to happen. Every craftable that's worth points is generally a great idea for us, so long as you always have a card to recruit with. Always remember to double check your craftables before flipping a bomb. And as for everything else, I'm gonna go through those in their own section. Just be aware that crows suffer from the same problem the Woodland Alliance faces, that you should not hyper-fixate on your craftable cards. If you cannot craft it by next turn, then you shouldn't hold on to the card. Trying to target specific craftables will just pigeonhole your entire game plan, and opponents will start to wonder why you keep coming back to their shitty rabbit clearing every turn. Recruit every single turn. Warriors turn into points, more warriors, more points. The only time you can skip recruiting is if you have less than 4 warriors in the supply. And even then, it's still good to do so. Just like our dumpster diving namesakes, we are quite happy recruiting with whatever useless trash we pulled from the deck last turn. Recruiting is a great outlet for bad cards because we can usually find a way to make use of those warriors. Our warriors get distributed all over the board, just like how that ugly birthday card from your aunt distributed glitter all over your sinuses. Now, since we recruit to all clearings of one suit, the clearing layout and faction matchup has a huge impact on the value of each suit we spend. If you play with default clearing suits, our warriors are only a clearing away at all times. It also means that our warriors are always a clearing away, even when we don't want that. Crows generally prefer the clumped up suits that you get from randomized clearings. Ideally, you get 2 of the suits all clumped up in a couple places, with the 3rd suit being comfortably sandwiched between them for when you want to hedge your bets. Having clumped up suits means that we can amass a ton of warriors in one place without ever needing to move, but this has diminishing returns. Warriors that are just standing around guarding face-up plots are not very valuable. Our warriors are most valuable when they're appearing out of thin air to place new plots, or destroy cardboard. If you can't avoid stacking more warriors than you need, you'll end up having to spend actions finding a use for them. Having the marquees in our game also presents a very unique challenge to our recruiting. Having the keep in our games means that one of the 3 suits we can recruit in will only give us 3 warriors every time, which makes that suit far less appealing overall. Choosing how often to plot is extremely situational. In a perfect world, we would plot twice every turn and win the game on turn 4. But a perfect world does not account for moving the warriors we need to plot and flip, nor does it account for cardboard-hungry opponents. We want to plot twice as often as it seems safe. The definition of safety is beyond the scope of this guide, but it includes things like, are our opponents able to reach us this turn? Do we have enough defenders to deter them from doing anything? Do you have ample warriors on the board for next turn, or are you starting to run a bit thin? Are my opponents about to fight each other, and my plots would draw that attention onto me? Would those 2 actions, moving and plotting, be better spent crippling someone's ability to fight me? Just like most of Crow's strategy, your accuracy with these predictions will determine your success in the game. Don't feel like you have to plot every single turn, either. We need an average of 4 victory points a turn for a chance at winning, and we're going to have some pretty high value flips, or multiple flips on one turn, that'll go a long way in bringing up our average. So long as our scoring is on pace, you don't need to feel afraid to take a turn off from plotting to go and crush someone's dreams, or to let the heat die down. Their loss in tempo will give you more than enough safety to repay your investment, and if they focus on other opponents, all the better for you. You may be asking, however, if 2 plots is good, then why not 3? And I've come up with a lovely rhyme that'll help you remember. Plotting once will keep the pace, and plotting twice could win the race. But plot 3 times, and you're a fucking disgrace. That was the YouTube-friendly version of the poem You're Welcome. Plotting 3 times in a turn is, in so many words, suicidal. Because we spend more warriors with each plot we place, triple plotting costs us a staggering 6 warriors. That's the average warrior count you'll see defending all those mole buildings. It's 1.5 turns worth of recruiting. If you actually plan to flip those plots, you're committing 9 warriors minimum. That's 60% of our entire supply. And that's not even considering the actions you spent consolidating those warriors beforehand. Not only did you spend all those warriors, but you spent an entire turn worth of actions on plotting alone. And you will never be in a situation where you can triple plot and those plots will be properly defended. Your warriors are either going to be on other face-up plots or miles across the map or dead, and those new plots are going to be completely exposed every time. Most critical of all, though, triple plotting draws an incredible amount of attention from other players. It is impossible for your opponents to ignore. They're going to see you do it, and you are going to lose every single one of the plots you just placed. You have my fucking guarantee. Don't do it. Exert is how we're going to try and make up for having the same action economy as the cats with none of the ramp. The right amount of exerting is as much as you can afford. Or better yet, as much as you can find use for. The card draw you sacrifice, however, adds up fast, as you don't even get your extortion cards. All you really need to watch out for, though, is that you always keep at least one card to recruit with for next turn. While our warriors are a precious, beloved part of our scoring engine, they are also a precious, beloved answer to someone else's scoring engine. And one of the best ways to maximize return on investment is through early policing. If you find a chance to abuse our nimble ability to assassinate weak cardboard and cause real damage to an opponent, it's rarely a mistake to do so. The ability to fight earlier than other factions means eating a fuckload of ambushes before other factions, because no one ever saves a fucking ambush. For any reason. Next, I want to talk about an extremely important part of Crow gameplay that's less of a strategy and more of a mindset. And that's the notion that you really need to get used to looking at the board state from a bird's eye view, rather than focusing only on the clearings you want for your next turn. Our faction doesn't recruit in only one place, after all. We're going to be interacting with every one of our opponents whether we want to or not. Learning the ability to keep track of the tempo and trajectory of those opponents instinctually is key in answering the important guiding question of our faction. Where do I want to be? We want safe places to plot, which means we need to understand where our opponents are headed and how much freedom they have to farm our plots for points. We want to keep people desperate and distracted, which means we need to identify emergent threats well in advance and cripple their tempo long before anyone else even considers those players a problem. We want to watch how opponents interact with each other in order to figure out who needs policing, who should be doing that policing, and how we can convince someone else not to police us. As much as people love to joke that Corvids are the faction that requires 0% of your brainpower, and they are, the reality is that we're not just planning our turns, we're planning everyone's turns. This notion of reading the board state and predicting the game extends all the way to the faction draft. Take this example. How do you picture a game with this draft going? Is this a good or a bad draft for us? Turn order matters a lot when reading a faction draft. Root generally wants people to police the faction that is next in turn order, meaning that we bear some responsibility for controlling the rats, and whoever's in second seat is responsible for controlling us. Crows love a draft where our turn is after a faction that can't police us well, but before a faction that we can bully into submission. Better yet, we love a draft where we can force people to police backwards in turn order, where they'll spend more effort for less value. In this particular example, I would expect the Woodland Alliance to be selected next, probably with cats in first seat and otters left unchosen. Cats would have to police the Woodland Alliance, but they won't have much to do since we're in position to eat all the sympathy we like. We are obligated to police the rats, which takes a fair amount of work, but is very doable if we're consistent in battling them. The rats then have to police the cats, and we want the rats to be just barely capable of doing that. As a side benefit of this, rats will probably keep Woodland Alliance from getting too far ahead as they place their mob tokens. If we spend our turns controlling the rats and eating sympathy tokens, we create a situation where the rats probably have to both police the cats as well as police backwards and turn order if they want to control us. And just like real anarcho-capitalists, we're going to keep the rats just poor enough that they can't afford to do what's best for society. Overall, this looks like a great faction draft, so long as it plays out how we anticipated. Alright, that's enough positivity for 1 year. I'm a millennial, goddammit, and it's time to share our legacy of crippling depression by talking about the Corvid death zone. You know that crows are bad. I know that crows are bad. The question isn't why, it's, of all the possible reasons, which did you choose? The biggest Achilles heel in competitive crow gameplay is right here. No, right here. This zone right here is where Corvid dreams go to die. The long-standing rule when it comes to crow games is thus: flip to 26 and you can win the game. Flip to 22 and you can get lunch early because your game is over. Flipping to 26 and up is good because between our crafting and our 4 measly actions, we have a decent chance of actually closing out a game by eating cardboard. Even if you can't immediately find the 4 victory points you need all at once, you're likely to find the remaining points on your next turn. 20 to 25 is bad because no opponent, no matter how catatonic, will allow you to flip even a single plot once you're past 18 victory points. It won't happen, and I don't recommend trying. This range is also bad because we are really, really good at flipping into this point range. As much as I'm sure we would both love to pore over the extremely speculative math behind this notion, the gist you need to take away is that it's very easy to get a 5-point flip when you're at 16 victory points, and you need to constantly watch out for it happening. Flipping to this range means that your game is essentially over, because there's no way in hell you're going to find 5 victory points a turn without plots as crows. While most factions can burst to a win from this range in 1 turn, as crows it's going to take us 3. Locking our faction down is so easy, I have seen crow players stall at 22 victory points for multiple real-world hours, and it was by no means an isolated occurrence. Now, how do we avoid flipping to 22? The best way to do it is to set yourself up to flip to about 24 victory points while having some crafting hidden in your hand. Is that practical, reliable advice? Fuck no. But it's the truth. The second best way to do it is to flip your way to being 10 victory points ahead of the entire table, so that you have an entire turn and a half to find 4 victory points before everyone catches up to you. Both the worst and the most reliable means of flipping to 26, however, is to convince your opponents to police each other, and then you manage to flip plots while they're distracted and or dead. Making it to 26 is perhaps the most important task in any Corvid endgame, and if we want any hope of doing it, we will need to heed the wise advice of Mr. Eddie Guerrero. There has never been a Corvid victory against opponents who refuse to allow it. Thus, a major part of our job as crow players is convincing the table to allow us to win the game. Allow me to introduce the count to 5 rule. The moment your opponents start counting up your plots, your game is over. Stopping a Corvid victory is so blindingly easy that there's nothing you can say or do that will stop people who've decided that it might be even remotely worth doing. We need to prevent people from ever reaching that conclusion, ever considering the possibility. Our first weapon in this game of psychological warfare and propaganda is a sustainable scoring pace. If you burst ahead of the table, they will refuse to allow you to ever score another point from plots. If we keep ourselves in second, then they're going to shut us down with whatever loose actions they have left when they stop the leader. The best place, then, for us to be, is right on the heels of second place. It'll be someone else's job to stop the leader with everything they've got, and fourth place isn't going to want to do a lick of that policing if they can spend that time catching up. Our second weapon in this game of cat and mouse is lying. Lie constantly. About everything. You see, bluffing is the act of lying about something that your opponent is incapable of directly verifying. The very rules of Root forbid us from showing our hand to others without cause, but lying about our hand or a token they can't see is precisely the sort of misdirection the Corvids were built for. Even something as simple as lying about an ambush we don't have enables us to convince an opponent that allowing our plot to flip would be less harmful than fighting it, encourage someone to overcommit to fighting our plot that we didn't really care about, or convince an opponent to battle a different opponent who actually did have that ambush. We can also do things like place undefended plots, so our opponents will expect them to be a raid. When we talk to our opponents, we can sound really heartbroken about some fictional plan we had that just got ruined on that last turn and our game is now screwed, so people think that you're struggling. We can pretend to place a dangerous plot in order to pressure a card-starved player to leave the clearing. Or we can make someone else look like a problem while overcoming whataboutism. I may be flipping for X points, you say, but I'm flipping for 0 the turn after. Meanwhile, person Y is going to be at Z points with this many actions and warriors. We can claim that we aren't able to afford to police them so that other people do that pleb work for you. In fact, scared or desperate opponents generally have less brain power to spend on accusing us of trying to shade our own scoring. Root games are frequently won on a difference of even a single turn, and every action we convince our opponents to waste on the wrong thing increases the odds that we can run away with the entire game. Once we've reached the mid-game, paying attention to what our opponents are saying is the best way to know when our plots are in danger. Here's some excellent examples of what to watch out for and how you can respond to it. Nicely done. You managed to survive the most complicated parts of this guide, so it's time for your reward. I'll bet you didn't expect this much meta-analysis from the most brainless faction in Root, eh?
That's what we wanted you to think all along.
Here's a section I like to call Stupid Crow Stupid Crow Tricks. Take one warrior and one raid and start a fight against a bigger army. 45% of the time, they'll hit you back hard enough to destroy the raid and get you more dudes. Do this against Woodland Alliance, and the odds that it succeeds rise to 75%. Even more reasons to love Toast. If you've got an opponent who's tired of your snare bullshit and wants it gone, trick it with a raid once they get there and waste their time. Trick it back again if they're dumb enough to leave. Guarding all of your flipped plots can be expensive. Sometimes it's better to abandon some of them in order to free up warriors and coax enemies into overextending. Opponents have been trying to expose your plot? It's more likely than you think. Use Trick to swap it with its identical counterpart and reset their guesses without changing the effect. If you really want to throw off someone's guesses, put two of the same plot in adjacent clearings. Surely no one in their right mind would snare two adjacent edge clearings, right? If you play with landmarks, the Lost City is a godsend. It's a reverse version of the Keep, where we get extra warriors almost every time we recruit. During setup, we can place all 4 of our starting warriors there and terrify people immediately. Alright, just like someone who's had one too many Tinder dates with flat earthers, it's time to start talking about our matchups. Generally, more red equals more dead. Crows thrive in an empty board, especially if there's only one militant faction. Contrary to the previous statement, however, crows actually do quite well in 5-player games. The extra player means that you don't get runaway second-place contenders that no one can stop, while giving people too little space to farm us for points safely. Fuck bird mole games. When your only red factions are the Despot and the Moles, you can bet that these two shitheels are going to spend the entire game trying to race each other while refusing to ever interact. Instead, they're going to spend every free action they have farming us insurgent factions for easy points every round, then bitch about us not helping to stop the leader when they start losing. My advice? Use your starting plot to bomb the moles, then destroy their tunnel. Bullying moles is generally easier than birds, and it may just force them to do something valuable for once. On to the matchups. Cats are a fairly neutral faction to encounter. They have a lot of cardboard, but they can be quite protective of their space. Because they're an ever-present threat that prefers exposure to battling, it can make it worthwhile to eliminate those lone cats before plotting. The Keep is the worst part about facing cats, however. It passively makes one of the 3 suits less valuable to us and limits our recruiting. Getting a snare onto one of their buildings can be an effective counterplay, but expect them to commit to deleting it. Myself, I prefer to snare clearings they haven't built in yet, as this can be equally effective while drawing less attention and makes you more expensive overall to remove. The Eerie is one of our least favorite factions to fight, and we have to treat them with a fair amount of respect. They have tons of actions and warriors, but need neither of them to score. They rarely have many cards, and generally prefer to battle our plots. When facing the charismatic or commander, take the time to control the number of warriors and roosts, and they'll have less space to go plot hunting. The bigger problem is the Despot, however, as they'll target our plots more than any other opponent on this list, and gain tons of points for doing it. The very moment you're able to turmoil the despot, you should. If you can't turmoil them, then keep their warrior count as low as you can manage until your chance arises. There's one great weapon we have against the birds though, and it's called the snare lock. A snare lock occurs when you place a snare onto the Erie's only roost, and they're no longer able to recruit or move without turmoiling, trapping them in a nearly endless turmoil loop until they can somehow destroy your snare first. This is a very mean thing to do to someone, and in friendly games I would argue it's better sportsmanship to just take the L instead of locking someone out of the game. But the very threat of this scenario occurring can be enough to interrupt an Erie player's win. The biggest threat posed by the Vagabond is their scoring pace. Under normal Infamy rules, the Vagabond is exceptionally well rewarded for annihilating our enemy's heavily guarded clearings, and we can't hope to outpace that. Our limited defenders are actually of benefit here. A Vagabond with 3 swords could destroy our plot with 1 defender for 3 points, or they could blow up Mole Town for upwards of 7. We can often get away with recklessly crafting items because someone else will have to clean up our mess for us. Just know that crossbows are a threat to face-down plots with only 1 defender. The list of which Vagabonds we hate most is the same as the Vagabond tier list, so no surprises to be had there. My best advice against the Vagabond, though, is to take advantage of our early battle capability and distributed recruiting by fighting them very early in the hopes of sending them to the forest while establishing hostility. The extra movement cost from hostility greatly reduces their effectiveness over the long term, especially because we're going to be absolutely everywhere all game. Being an excellent source of easy points and a great cover for our plots, the Woodland Alliance is easily our favorite faction to encounter. They want to keep all their cards and lack the warriors to battle us and would rather just outscore us instead. A well-defended snare and a choke point is a great way to keep their scoring in check, but make sure you keep a watchful eye on their faction board so you know when they have to be dealt with properly. Bombing one of their bases isn't only advisable, it's often necessary. We have somewhat of a love-hate relationship with the Lizard Cult. They hate losing cards and can't easily battle, so our plots are a major threat to them. In exchange, Lizard players with nothing better to do will often convert defenders on our face-down plots because it's a cheap way to harm an opponent. If you can't convince the Lizard player that a forever war with you is a waste of resources that both of you will need later, which it is, then convince them that their actions have consequences by destroying their hand cards anytime the outcast isn't in their favor. Myself, I like to establish friendly relations with lizards whenever I can by placing harmless raids and snares in their space where other opponents will struggle to reach them, then turning up the heat later if the lizards start getting ahead. Otters can be one of our worst matchups, and the reason is that exposure is bullshit. Complete bullshit. Especially vindictive otter players will scour the board for face-down plots to guess each turn because they know they can just keep drawing cards until they eventually guess correctly. And all those cards aren't very useful if there's no plots left to craft with. Otters can be a valuable failsafe for turns where we lack a card to recruit, but I wouldn't leave more than 3 funds with them at any time because the absence of those funds is very noticeable. As I've said in my Cat's Guide and other videos though, the real answer to any otter problem is just to kill them until the problem goes away. Moles. Moles! God, I hate this faction. Moles are capable of outscoring the Woodland Alliance and out-battling the Erie while having just about as much board presence as the Vagabond. Outscoring us is a threat, but the bigger problem with moles is that they usually won't do a single thing to police another faction unless it gains them more victory points than doing nothing. And guess which faction happens to be the easiest and most valuable to police with the fewest downsides? The least expensive way to do mole control is extortions, farming tunnels, and killing the lone moles they want to sway ministers with. We need to keep them on the back foot early so they never reach a point where they're starting 5 battles a turn against anyone who seems easy to kill. If you know your mole player is good with the faction, it's absolutely worth extorting or bombing them with your setup plot just to make sure they're the one getting fucked over first. The rats are like a red version of the lizards, in that we both hate each other. Our recruiting is a huge problem for their scoring, and tables will often assume that it's the crow's job to keep the warlord in check. While it is valuable to slow the rats down, shouldering this burden alone is a trap that opponents will use to comfortably outrace us both. Let your recruits give the warlord a little bit of extra work to do, but don't focus on it. Commit to killing strongholds or the warlord before they amass enough rats to clear the map with Relentless. If the warlord is the only threat to our plotting, bully them constantly so we have the entire map to ourselves. And if the warlord is struggling while other opponents pull ahead, then let them out of crow jail to wreak havoc on your behalf. Oh, and make liberal use of raid plots to replace the crows that you'll inevitably be losing. The Keepers in Iron are a very elaborate, difficult faction whose entire game plan boils down to crossing the map at some point and outscoring the shit out of everyone. The Badgers are very protective of their cards and warriors, and their retinue is not very flexible when it comes to interacting with other factions outside of the turn they had planned in advance. Anyone who would voluntarily play the Keepers is a threat to outscore us, and needs some degree of policing from the whole table. Their way stations are where we will do our best work, as the Badgers generally don't plan to battle wherever they have a way station. Contest unguarded way stations for rule to make delve and recover more expensive, or destroy them if you need to limit their cards and recruiting or just want some points. If all else fails, however, the Badgers can be snare-locked just like the Eerie so long as they aren't able to encamp a second way station in another clearing. Alright, when it comes to crafting, there's a lot to talk about, so we're going to organize them by tier. Starting with S tier. Charm Offensive lets us draw a card even if we exert. Better Be Our Bank lets us draw a card before we recruit. Eerie Emigre is 2 free actions per turn for 1 card. If you couldn't afford to kneecap opponents while sustaining your engine, this is your answer. Armorers essentially negates an entire battle, but you still get your extra hit from embedded agents. Doubling the action cost of plot removal makes this the most effective defensive card in the game. Literally anything worth VP is great. Every point we can craft is a point that might get us past 22. We already want to craft everything we can get our grubby little hands on, now we get extra actions for it too. More points. Good. You even help fill this thing up with those warriors we spend to plot. There's a lot of things we hate to see in this game. Coffin makers, propaganda bureau, toast with Corvid planners, moles with marine broker, that one guy using swap meat on us every turn for some godforsaken reason. Don't be fooled into using this card as recruit fodder. You will never regret having crafted it. On to the A tier. Same great flavor as Eerie Emigre, but worse. Mobility is always our friend when we hate spending move actions. Boat Builders also improves the effectiveness of our raids by letting us place warriors across the water. We don't often care about the cards in our hand, but other people care about theirs. This is a zero-cost way to piss off anyone who's been hoarding craftables and ambushes. More cards. Good. So long as we can use them. Partisans make our plots look less appealing to opponents, while making violence more appealing to us. Sappers does that first thing too, but worse. Tax Collector lets us reposition useless crows in the middle of nowhere while giving us cards. Scouting Party lets us battle to our heart's content without soaking all the ambushes. Our next tier is something I like to call Tactical Crafting, featuring our good friend Bird Song Bullshit. There's a number of craftables that have a pretty specific utility to us alone, and for most of them, they take advantage of our unique ability to craft in Birdsong. Because of its in Birdsong timing window, False Orders is particularly useful, because we can use it the same turn we craft it. Use it to kneecap an opponent easier. Use it to send their warriors onto that bomb or extortion you're about to flip. Craft False Orders and use it, then craft the other copy of False Orders and use that one too. We can craft Royal Claim and immediately score it, assuming we rule anything. We can craft Stand to Deliver and immediately lose it, assuming it's worthwhile. Propaganda Bureau is a great crafting choice anytime your plots are free to craft it. Not because its ability is all that good for us. No, it's situational at best. Crafting Propaganda Bureau is great because no one else can have Propaganda Bureau. This card is so goddamn annoying when used against us, because opponents will gleefully convert all of our face-down plot defenders anytime they're able because it's the easiest way for them to hurt someone else. We can overcome this, but it's expensive and irritating to do, and we would much rather that this card never shows up in the first place. Informants make you lose a ton of card draw for those ambushes. If we happen to also have Charm Offensive, we can use it twice per turn. But the real value of informants is when there's only one player at the table who's going to attack us, because all those ambushes will cripple their military without us ever spending an action to battle. Just don't. Sure, it's appealing to think that our high theoretical crafting output will allow us to dominate the race for favor cards, but the reality is that it's not likely to happen. Getting 3 plots of the same suit is slow and difficult, and opponents can clearly tell what you're trying to do. Placing those 3 suited plots has likely already convinced your opponents to get out of those clearings in the first place. And most importantly, we really hate getting hit by favor cards. You remember that part where losing a single plot can ruin our entire game? Where losing warriors is equivalent to losing entire turns? Imagine all of that, but happening 4 times at once. And that, my dear bin dwellers, is the Corvid Conspiracy. I hope you have enjoyed this 5-course aperitif of Root's worst faction, a faction defined not by their strengths, but by their shortcomings. And while this nearly hour-long video still feels inadequate in explaining the hidden depth this faction offers, I hope it at least has illuminated why they are easily my favorite faction of all. And in case you were wondering, I don't regret lying to all of you with that otter thumbnail, and I never will. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and as always, subscribe or don't, I'm not your dad.